Hello, everyone. This is Eric Pennington with The Spirit of EQ, and welcome to the Spirit of EQ podcast. On today's episode, we have a very special guest, John O'Hagan, a real estate entrepreneur, former touring musician.
Life is a journey. Spirit of EQ helps shape and guide the road ahead for individuals, leaders, teams, and organizations striving to realize their full potential through emotional intelligence. Spirit of EQ is a coaching and consulting company that assists individuals and businesses to reach their full potential by developing emotional intelligence. In business, managers and leaders recognize the value of training to develop leadership skills. What they may not realize is that those skills are far more effective when they pay attention to not only performance, but also to people. Emotional intelligence is a crucial skill because people drive performance and emotions drive people.
And joining me as always is Jeff East with the Spirit of EQ. Hi, Jeff. How are you?
Hi, Eric. Nice to meet you, John, and everyone out there listening.
All right. So, John O'Hagan, welcome to the Spirit of EQ podcast.
Oh, Eric and Jeff, it's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate y'all having me on.
Hey, John, I've got to give a little background for the audience about you and I and how we met and how this kind of came to be. And we have a mutual friend who also happens to be named John, who sent both of us, I think, an email saying, you two should meet. So I'm going to introduce you. And I was just so intrigued by your background. And obviously, maybe most importantly, John's fondness for you and the things that you've done to help him. I'm thinking, of course, I'm going to have a conversation with the guy. But truth be told, I wasn't thinking about you being a guest on our podcast. That's why this is really kind of cool, because I can't wait for the audience to get a taste of your life and all the things you've done. But when we got on the phone, because I know you had you wanted to know a little bit about podcasting and what we were doing with it. But when we got on the phone, we were talking, and I didn't tell you this, John, but as you were talking, I'm going, man, this guy, he's got a voice and he's got a story. He'd be a great guest for us. And I'm thinking, I'm going to go ahead and spring it on him. And then that's when as we were talking, I said, hey, well, if you're interested, we'd like to have you on. Because as John, I think I told you, I said, our deal is finding those kind of people that have a great story and are conversationalists. So that's how we met. Then, fast forward as time and scheduling and all the rest, we were able to get you on the show today. And like I said, I'm super psyched and looking forward to the conversation. So, all right, John. So I'm going to jump right in and I'm going to go to your entrepreneur journey, right?
Sure.
I'll let you tell the audience a little bit about some of those ventures that you've been involved in and what kind of led you to them and that kind of thing. And then I've got some other side questions around it that I'd love to throw at you as well. So tell the audience, what was the start of your entrepreneur journey?
Oh, man. So first off, again, thanks again for having me on here. And I had no idea that it would be a recruiting phone call. I thought I thought John would, he spoke so with such great affinity for you that I was really excited to make that connection, and I appreciated that you were willing to have a conversation with a stranger out of the blue.
Yeah.
Same thing. When we were talking, I was like, oh, this dude's going to be a friend for a long time. I can feel that already.
Yeah.
And yes, I appreciate the interest. I mean, I don't know, Jeff, I hope you're okay with Eric just making that decision to throw the line out there and have me on without any information. I guess y'all probably work that out.
We do that to each other, so don't worry.
Yeah, there's a great level of trust. Right.
That's awesome. Okay, so my entrepreneurial journey, both my folks, my mom and dad, as long as I've been alive, have been running their own business. My mom ran I guess the term would be like desktop publishing, before like computers were even like a commonplace practice.
Mm-hmm,
so I grew up in like large, weird warehouses full of like type, like physical metal type font, like and printing presses and just really fun stuff when you're a kid. I didn't realize that, I was getting picked up from school, and rather than going home like my friends, I was set loose in this warehouse. I'm surprised I have all my fingers. Now that I think about that, I think about that as a father. I need to have a conversation with my parents. But they were always talking business in the way that, a family, we weren't affluent, right? Like, we were scraping by, and as technology changes and things like that, I watched them have to adapt and change. And so I was there. Eric, you made a point before we jumped on the podcast about on-the-job training that I had not really connected. It just sort of was what my experience was. And so, like, there were times when, when we were paying for McDonald's dinners with change, and then there were times like, my dad bought a brand new Acura, and I felt like we were the richest family in the world. So I've watched the ups and downs of entrepreneurship. So I guess that was sort of in my blood. I don't know if y'all follow any of the 4 personality types, 4 tendencies as a general guideline, but one of them is just how people react to internal expectations and external expectations. And my therapist had me kind of take some of those tests, and I'm of the rare personality type that pushes back against everything. And I think that's what led me down the road of punk rock, and sort of pushed that whole punk rock, do-it-yourself, like, way of life. I think I was sort of predetermined for that, and had the example of my folks just doing it themselves. So I didn't have any of the stigma around, I wasn't comfortable working for other people. I wasn't comfortable giving the reins away. And, going from that to working for other people like you inevitably have to do when you're, a teenager or adolescent starting to get your first job. It's like, oh man, this sucks. Like, I feel like I have a better way to do this, like every teenager does, whether I did or not. But I knew that I was smart. I knew that I was capable, and I always felt, now at 39 years old, I can look back and say I was cocky at the time, but it felt real. But I've never had a boss that I worked for that I thought was like significantly smarter than me or was more capable of doing their job than I could. So I think that attitude sort of permeated everything I did, and that, from playing music to any of the other more professional ventures. And I don't know how much you want me to get into that at the moment, but.
Well, that's, John, I'm going to, because there's so much we want to cover with you, and there's something you said there that kind of got me thinking about the connection to of self-knowledge, right? Where we get to that place where we go, okay, I know these things work, I know these things don't, and I'm only going to focus on the things that I know work, right? Because you've met them, we've met them. There's so many people who are playing a different role than what they were intended to play, right? And it's tremendously inspiring to me when we have a guest, when we have, in our work, those folks that go, hey, I may not be the most kept and most smartest, but at least I know who I am, right? Or at least I got a good grasp on that. So within that, did your parents, did they encourage entrepreneurism in you? Or did they, hey, I don't want my kid to have to deal with the ups and downs of entrepreneurism? Where did they land on that?
So, my dad is very similar to me in the, no one can tell me what to do. So inevitably he and I would clash, and we have a complicated relationship that is absolutely it's been challenging at times, but it is always based in love. And so, like, I don't have, like, I wouldn't disparage my father. I think he's challenged me in the right ways, but we're so similar. Sometimes we'll butt heads to a degree that can be complex and conflict resolution wasn't really a giant skill set for either of us. And so, but there were things that he said and did that always rang true for me, and that was, as long as you're not hurting anybody, I don't care what you do for a living, and I don't care. Like if you're happy and you're not hurting anybody, I don't care if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, or clean the toilets at a hospital. I don't care, as long as you're happy and you're not hurting anyone. Which funny enough, like, now I'm involved heavily in combat sports where literally I hurt people, but I also get hurt. So it's but so I never felt pressure from my folks at all for a career direction, other than I had really high expectations because I was smart. So they were like we're not gonna, basically, like, you're gonna have a work ethic. It's going to be a strong one. You come from a family that has a strong work ethic. You're not going to coast on being smart. You're going to have to work too. Whatever you do, basically, I would come home with B's and C's, and they'd be like, "Oh, yeah, obviously this isn't okay." And I'm like, "What? These are fine. Like, who cares?" Like, no, you're an A student. You've got the smarts for it. We expect A's from you. So I appreciate it. I didn't appreciate it at the time. I appreciate it now, understanding that they were building a work ethic in me without the expectations of social. Like, they didn't care what the Joneses were doing. They were doing their own thing, and they didn't want me to worry about impressing them, but they didn't want me to slack and coast either. So I think, a little bit of them had that. My parents are, I think, second generation immigrants, Irish and Italian, and so from Brooklyn. They have a lot of cultural stuff from back east that, those things just follow all of us around to some degree, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think in the good times, when you're an entrepreneur, I couldn't imagine doing anything else. But then, when something really bad happens and all the eyeballs are on you, you can, I wish I would have just done, I wish I would just be working at Luby's cafeteria or whatever, and not have to deal with all this pressure.
Yeah.
But, so my goal was to be an ER doctor. Since I was little, I wanted to be a doctor, and that was the goal. And I did all the things. And, it wasn't until I passed, after I graduated high school, that I my interest sort of waned a little bit in that. I wound up going to community college, and it doesn't make sense to spend all the money for prereqs at a university. And I don't know, I don't want to live in a dorm. I just live at home. It's fine. And do the prereqs because it's cheaper. My folks were willing to pay for college and have the ability to, so I had that privilege, and I wanted to save them some money. And so they were really excited about it. My dad and I would talk about which med schools, and we'd go in and look at them. And so they were really supportive and excited about that. I think from the protective aspect of, that sort of immigrant mentality of all right, I came here, my folks came here, I worked my butt off, but I want you to have something a little more solid.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I think after about a year and a half of, just totally coasting through college, I don't do well in a classroom environment, and I was unhappy. And as I got older, I got more stubborn, and I got to sit my folks down and let them know that I was going to be dropping out of college to join a touring punk rock band with my idiot friends. And instead of becoming a doctor, I was just going to do this and kind of see what was up after that.
Wow. You know what, John, as you're mentioning that, there are so many similarities to you and I in our, I consider it wiring. And I'm going to go back to our first conversation when we met. And then I'm also going to kind of tailor that into a little bit of my next question. But you mentioned something to me about realizing at some point in your life that you were not going to be a good fit for you would not be a good employee. I think that's how we kind of were wording it.
Yeah.
And where my road went differently than yours is that I tried to talk myself out of that. Like that kind of, well, I can be a good employee and I can stay in one place and I can just put as much time as needed and I can take it. And it caught up to me and it smacked me so hard. And I realized, and it took me a long time, that Eric, this is who you are. This is who you are.
What do you think it was that motivated that sort of dysregulation where you were speaking out of both sides of your mouth to yourself?
Well, I think the biggest part of it, John, was I was trying to be Superman to everyone I was closest to. And I connected that to performance. See, if I jump over this building in a single bound, number one, you're going to love me more, right? And then number two, I'll get an award. I'll see, look at, they're applauding. Now, the weird thing about this particular episode, too, I have to say to the audience, is that this is the first time that we've ever done a show where we've had 3 bass players. Jeff is a bass player, I'm a bass player, and you, John, are a bass player. So what I'm about to say is going to connect both of you, and that idea of, the applause. As much as I was into the art, there was something about hearing somebody give that kind of response that was rather intoxicating, right? And and for me, if I played a certain note or a certain series of notes and it kind of triggered a great feeling and happiness for you, well, let me do that again. Because that just shows I'm really Superman, right? I am that guy. And I think like in every situation with Superman, there's always the looming possibility of kryptonite. And in my case, I got kryptonite about 15 years ago. And through the recovery process, that's when I started to get to the conclusion that I'm not that guy. I'm not the corporate guy. I'm not the guy that's going to stay for 15, 20 years. I'm just not. And I got to a place where I was okay with that. I was actually good with that. So, yeah.
You didn't feel like you had to show and earn love that you were already worth and entitled to.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, as you, all of us, John, I think if we truly are going to just be blunt, honest about it, right? No one ever came to me and said, oh, by the way, Eric, your mom, your dad, your wife, your kids are going to need you to be Superman. So here's your cape. Here's the S on the front of your chest. And I will be back tomorrow to see how many buildings you've leaped over. Because we get into these narratives and these narratives in our head that we just make agreements with. We just say, oh, well, yeah, that's the way it must be. So therefore, I'm going to go do X, Y, and Z. Which I'll say this really briefly. And Jeff, I want you to jump in here. I found this exercise, and I can't remember her name, so I'm not even going to try because I'll butcher it. But it's a little exercise that is designed to help us with those narratives. And the exercise goes something like this. Okay, I have this thought that I need to be Superman. Ask the question, Eric, is that true? Okay? And then even if your answer is, well, yeah, of course, because I need to ask the question with ask a follow-up question that goes, is it really true? The answer to is it really true, in most cases, no, it's not. Then what are you going to do? That has helped me kind of deal with those narratives that, quite frankly, John, Jeff, they're still around. I still have times where I go, hey, if I tell them about this great thing I did, I bet they'll applaud. I bet they'll think I'm a really good guy. So you know this works. So anyway, okay, I'm going to pivot. Jeff, you.
Well, John, one of the kind of running jokes that Eric and I have in our podcast is some way or another we work some music metaphor into the podcast. And it's usually around, for Eric, Miles Davis, and for me, Rush.
A solid reference points, of course. Yeah.
Yes. It is very, very true. Very, very true. So, speaking of music,
well,
okay, go ahead.
Ask my question.
Sorry, I thought that was a question.
No, that was just a statement.
Okay, that wasn't a question.
That was
John,
a lead into the question.
A lead in.
So, why did you decide on playing the bass?
Oh man, that's a really easy answer, and not a very deep one, unfortunately. So, my friend Chad, who I met, we were freshman year at a Catholic school. Both my folks went to Catholic school, so I went to Catholic school, even though we weren't Catholic. But they grew up in Brooklyn, and that's where you went. So I went to Catholic school. My first week or so, I met this kid named Chad, and he was really into punk rock, and I was into punk rock, but I didn't have any older brothers or sisters, and there was no internet, and there was no way for it. It was this far out, this whole thing that I wanted to know about. It was underground, and I had no access to it. But I was really into skating. I was really into riding bikes, and I really loved the what I thought punk rock was. I met Chad, and Chad made me a mixtape of all these crazy punk bands that I had never heard of. And, pardon me, and so all of a sudden I had a punk friend, and we were going to be punks together. And we talked about music, and we traded records back and forth, and he was like, hey, I know a guy who plays drums, and I play guitar. You should play bass. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that. He's like, it's easy, dude. There's only 4 strings. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's true. That's 2 less strings than guitar, that makes sense. And we went, so my birthday was coming up, and I asked my parents, for my birthday present, if I could get a bass, a bass setup, and so I could play music in Chad's garage. And neither of my parents play instruments at all, and they were like, well, I don't know, we're not sure that we want you doing music, and it was just felt unfamiliar to them, / fast forward a few years later, and we would regret doing it, I'm sure.
Right.
I felt like I've been in sales my whole life, so I was able to explain to them how good music is for the brain, and I was struggling in math, and music have a lot of interwoven concepts, and I think it's something that would really help me concentrate and maybe make math make more sense. And I think my parents just rolled their eyes and went, all right, fine. And we went to a place here in town called Bazaar Guitar, and I bought, what kind of music are you going to be playing? And I'm like, punk. And they're like, all right, you're going to want a Fender P-Bass. And I didn't like the swoop of the pickguard on the Fender P-Bass. I wanted something more clean line, so I was like, nah, I think I like that other one. Like, well, that's a jazz bass. That's not going to give you the tone you want. And I'm like, I'm 14. I don't know how to play this. I don't care. I want the one that looks cool like that. And I think it was black, too. The other one was, white or red. And the guy totally gave me a hard time. He's this, 45-year-old, which felt ancient at the time, Hesher metalhead guy. And he just was like, no, you don't want that. And I'm like, anytime somebody says that kind of stuff to me, I immediately am always going to kick back at that. So I left with a Fender jazz bass and a little Fender single 15-inch speaker amp and enough, chords and everything to make the whole thing work. And I played that thing nonstop. I had lessons a little bit, but they were only once a week. And at 14, there's you got a new thing that you love. All I did was play the bass nonstop. So I just kind of figured out how to play bass and, took the lessons. But man, I just wanted to be in the band. It seemed cool. I wanted to impress Chad. And that was the only position left in the band, so that's what I did. And and I still play jazz basses to this day. I don't mess with the P bass at all.
All right, so I've got one more question with this.
Yeah.
What would you describe as the role of the bass in a band?
So I think it depends on the project, right? In most of the bands that I've played bass in, I think of the bass as like scaffolding in between the drums and the guitars. So there's not a lot of melody in the punk bands I play in, and so I don't worry too much. And usually we're playing really fast, so there's not a lot of room for like any sort of filigree or show offiness. I like to think like, obviously we're playing same or similar notes. Obviously want to introduce some dissonance into a sound if the song calls for it. But like syncing up and bringing the kick drum and like the syncope between the kick drum and like the strum pattern of the guitar. So I think like the scaffolding that the song comes together in is just that like keeping it driving and keeping the momentum while connecting those two instruments is really the way that I see my role as a bass player.
So how does it feel when you're doing that the way you want to do it?
I think that's one of those things that is real hard to describe unless you've done it. And it's like, how does a surfer describe hitting the wave? And really just like locking in. It feels like the most natural thing in the world. Like something else is like rather than creating, you found something that was already existing and needed to be there, and you kind of like play around it. And then once you find it, you're in. And then it feels really natural and like, oh yeah, that's what I was searching for, which is weird because you are creating it, right? But wow, that's a really...
You're doing a great job, by the way, in describing it.
I never had to articulate locking in.
Yeah, because Jeff, to John's point, and John, another area in which you and I have a connection because I play a Fender Jazz.
Yeah.
And I have a 1979 Fender Jazz. And at some point, I'll tell you the story behind it and how it came to be for me.
Please.
But I've customized it, and now, because I was a big Jaco fan, right? So Jaco Pastorius was like, I was that kid in his room listening to Jaco's lines over and over and over, trying to figure out what in the...
Trying to figure out what is
happening. My
happening.
gosh. And yeah, I would pick that guy, right? Because some of the stuff he did on that thing was just mind-blowing. But what's interesting about that, where I was going to go with it, is that, it is hard to describe, and unless you've done it. And I had this situation a few weeks ago. My wife is talking to me because now when I play, it's mostly for therapy, and the amount of time I can spend doing it is limited. But I've been learning the art of these micro moments of playing, right? And I'm playing this song that was fairly complex and everything. And my wife was asked, so was it hard to kind of... And I said, I don't know how to describe it. It's just, I just knew what to do. And it wasn't because I was some virtuoso. It wasn't because, oh my gosh, look at you. It was just like you described it, John. It's like when you go to that place and it's like, you know what to do there. And it's like, for lack of a better way of saying it, it's like going to a home that maybe you've never been to, but you've always been to. I don't know. I guess that's my way.
Yeah, like one of those weird dreams where you're in a Kmart, but somehow it's also your dad's house and you know it? You're like, what? I don't understand.
Yeah, right. Exactly. All right. So I'm going to ask you about that part or a different part of your musical career. And then I certainly want to get to some of the ventures that you're involved in current day, because you've got a lot of them. But so from a music standpoint and decision making, and you look back over your musical career and kind of think, okay, yeah, that was a really good decision. And then maybe if you feel right, feel comfortable, what was one where you go, that was not a good decision?
Oh yeah. So I think honestly, like one of the, looking back, obviously a huge fork in the road for me was deciding to pursue music to the degree that we were going to try to see how far this particular project would take us. Mm-hmm. We're playing music that we knew couldn't or wouldn't necessarily be mainstream.
Yep.
But it's hard to convince 5 young men to get on the same page about anything, let alone creating some art together, and let alone being like, hey, do you guys want to like torpedo our early 20s? Our singer was a little older at the time, like our early 20s and mid 20s. Do we want to torpedo the normal experiences that most people seek and essentially put our lives on hold to try to like tour across the country and see what we can do with this project? And to get everybody to be like, yes, it seemed very natural at the time. Like, of course we're going to do this. We really care about this project. Like, let's go. This is what you do.
Yep.
And now looking back, it's like, oh my God, like now that I'm, older and I've got, houses and cars and, people who rely on me, and I've got, a family, and it's like, oh my gosh, but what an amazingly opportune time to have had that as an option. Right. And I have an uncle that's like a terrible person. And I don't say that lightly, and I'm not a big fan of disparaging people, but
right.
Really, really bad person. And he, of all people, was like consoling my mom about like, what felt like a huge, I don't know, just jarring difference in what was happening yesterday versus what was happening today. And he told her, like, look, the guy doesn't have he's no family, no mortgages. He's a bartender, like who cares? Like, let him go do this. This is the only time he can do this. He can't do this after he's in medical school debt. Like, right? Like, you can't go through med school and come out at 30 whatever years old and be like, I'm going to go play in a punk band. Like,
right.
You go make, like I was lucky to come home from tour with, $30 in my bank account. And you can only kind of pull that off when you're in your like teens and early 20s. If you've got folks that are like, yeah, you can keep your stuff here while you live in a van that smells like farts and 5 other men live in it. Right. Like there's really only a short amount of time when you can pursue that. Like maybe if you're in a large band or a band that has like the potential for commercial success, but we were a punk band. Like there was no chance of us getting on the radio other than like the like ska punk hour show or what, like right. Like the small little snippet. And even then we were the band that was like, all right, these crazy hardcore bands, like, we weren't ever going to make it as a career. But, it's like, we also had record labels that put out records for us and gave us like, we didn't pay to record anymore after our first 7-inch. It was like, wow, that's pretty cool. Like, we had a recording budget from a record label, and they bought us a tour van, and they, so we had like success to some degree to where it was sustainable because the record label was motivated to keep us on the road selling records, and we're obviously motivated by writing music and being on tour. So I think that huge moment that didn't feel so large at the time, it felt inevitable of just being like, yeah, I'm going to stop the trajectory that I've been on and go this direction. We're just going to do it. Was, the best decision, one of the best decisions I've ever made, other than deciding to become a father. Like, I think like that led me down so many things of like proof of concept.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And if I put my mind to it and I decided we were going to do a thing, like, cause we had a manager that was a good friend of ours, and like her and I were like band mom and dad. We would book all the tours, and like our singer was really helpful with a lot of that stuff. But like, I booked the majority of our tours. I did a lot of those things with Michelle, and we were just making this project happen. And like, you've broken down in a 1976 mini Winnebago outside San Jose in the Los Baños exit for like the 5th time on tour, and you're just like, how are we going to get out of this one? And then you pull it off. Like, business decisions don't seem so scary.
Yeah.
I'm cold. We have $11 in the band account, and something is like on fire under the hood. That can't be good. Like, how are we going to pull this off?
Oh my goodness. So, any thoughts on a bad decision?
There was a record label that we signed to that I think we, and more specifically I think I was the more of the driving decision. Like, they were very punk in ethos, and I wanted a little bit more protection from, they were strangers and they wanted to put out a record, and so we wanted to like write contracts and like, just like keep everything on paper and keep it legit. And I think a lot of that was really fear-based from our end, and they were willing to do it, but I think it really like it fractured the relationship before it really got a chance to get started, and it wound up just being sour the whole time, and we wound up moving on to a different record label, and there were like a lot of bad feelings. And I think with a little more perspective nowadays, like looking back and being like, what was I afraid of? Like, were they going to steal our music that wound up costing them money anyway? Like, we never made any money for record labels. Like, we were lucky to break even for them. What was I afraid of that I was willing to like sacrifice a relationship for a scarcity mindset outcome? And as a general principle, I think I try to not do that. I try to live in abundance, and I try to like make sure that I put relationships first almost in everything, because I think everything else can be sort of worked through and figured out if everybody's putting the relationship first. So I think we kind of we burned that record label without necessarily meaning to, but I'd say that that's probably like a big regret that we just kind of took ourselves too seriously too early in that particular relationship, and
Gotcha.
It wasn't the right fit,
Yeah. So I know that this is on the minds of our audience. Can you tell us some of the bands or the band that you were with, if that's okay?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So the band that I toured in for the longest time, the sort of biggest project I was in, was called Where Eagles Dare. It's a Iron Maiden song. It's a Misfit song. It's like a Clint Eastwood movie. Like, there were a few other bands that came later and sort of took that name once the internet, because this is, early 2000s before.
Yeah.
These are the MySpace and Friendster days. We didn't have Spotify or YouTube or any of those things really. So I think we're on Spotify. Some of the old records are on Spotify under Where Eagles Dare AZ, because we're from Arizona. But there are some weird like European metalcore iterations of Where Eagles Dare that is like the black hair and the painted black eyes and stuff that was it was not us. So there's a couple of them still out there, but I mean there's a couple records you can still find on like Amazon and stuff. Somebody sent me a link a while ago. It's like, oh, interesting. And then another band I toured in for a while that I actually sang for instead of playing bass is called Royal Monsters. There's a little bit of a darker project. I was going through a divorce and needed a different kind of outlet. Where Eagles Dare was a really like positive, like we call it, like the genre would be called like posi-core. And it was a really fun project, but that's where most of my touring and like recording and negotiation with record labels and all that stuff, like that's where all that experience came from, was from Where Eagles Dare.
Ah, wonderful. So when you think about the thing that struck me, John, you've got this energy and you're involved in a lot of different things. And I would imagine there were times when there was a singular thing. And then I imagine you probably have moved, and I don't know if this is current day, maybe you can tell us, how do you manage and keep it together when you have these multiple, because, and for our audience, we'll have in the show notes, John's bio, so you'll see some of this, but how do you balance when you're in multiple ventures like you are?
It's a great question, and just to save folks having to read through my bio real quick, I'll give a quick one if that helps.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I have been a realtor and now designated broker and co-owner of a real estate brokerage here in town called Retro Real Estate. We focus on historic and mid-century modern homes for the most part. It's a small niche, but we do a ton of business, even though we're a very small boutique brokerage. We're working on getting franchises going up and down the West Coast and the Hawaiian Islands, because those places have really beautiful, a large percentage of the homes in those areas are gorgeous mid-century or historic bungalows and things that are really inspiring architecture and inspiring homes, which I think, the goal is always to live somewhere that helps you build a baseline and keeps you fulfilled. And I think that's like the key to a good life is feeling safe and inspired at home. So that's our goal as a brokerage. So I've been doing that for about 14 years with some other companies and things like that, but now we run our own show, which is really fun. I was the co-founder and co-owner of a tattoo shop here in Phoenix called Golden Rule Tattoo, and only about 2 months ago, I sold my shares to my business partners, who are still two of my best friends, and one of them was the singer in the band I was mentioning that we toured together.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, so I think it was July 2009, we opened up our first tattoo shop with 2 artists other than him, and grew into a shop that owns 2 buildings and 17 artists, about 25, 26 people, full staff. Like a lot of families got to live a fulfilling life making art based on the on the business model we had. And Golden Rule Tattoo is pretty self-explanatory, right? We try to overcome all the obstacles that people were concerned about. They wanted a tattoo, but are put off by the image of tattoos. So, our motto was clean, friendly, professional, because that's what everybody worries about when they're going in.
Yeah.
I'm really proud of that. We got, I think, 7 years running #1 tattoo shop in Phoenix and in Arizona, and tons of awards, and just we built something really special. But for me, it was time for me to focus on retro real estate and also train, teach, and compete in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for the last 11 years. I'm a brown belt under Nathan Ziegler. It's like of Helson Gracie is the lineage of our system here, and I teach twice a week. Competed in Japan, all over the country, and trained all over the world. Whenever I'm out there, I trained in like a bombed out warehouse in Split, Croatia. It's been an amazing journey. And when I was talking about combat sports, like that's a big regulation for me to be able to. If I don't train for a little while, whoever I'm dating or married to is like, you need to go train. And like, that is a huge part of regulation for me. So, you know, but it's more than a hobby, right? I've had professional jiu-jitsu fights. It's not something that I try to make any money off of. You know, if I'm going somewhere to teach a seminar, I'll, you know, like $20 come in and I'll teach it. You're like, but I'm not trying to make a living off of jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. Right.
It's something I'm very passionate about, but I don't want to make that my living. And I'll get into the answer of your question. It'll tie in here, I promise.
No worries.
I can feel you guys looking at the clock, and I'm sorry to everybody.
And we're not. And we're not. This is great because I'm gonna forewarn you, John. I'm gonna kind of change my question around as you're unfolding this. So, but keep going.
Okay. So those are like, you know, and I'm a father. My daughter Eleanor Danger is 6.5 years old, and just the light of my life. I mean, she goes by Nora, and so like my fingers, I've tattooed on my fingers the words Nora's dad.
Oh,
like
nice.
It is everything in my world is to make hers better and to is dedicated to her. And I'm also partnered. My partner Ashley and I have been together for about 5 years. We live together. That's Nora's stepmom, and you know, so I've got a lot of things on my plate that are very, very important to me.
So let me. I'm going to shift and give you that different question because
let's hit it.
Well, you made it very clear. At least it's clear for me that these are things that you seem to have a great deal of mastery over. And I know you're not perfect, and I know you make mistakes and all that other good stuff. But you're not talking about it in a sense. I don't get a sense of like, well, we did this and we think we're going to do that, and then, well, we're not sure if that's going to work, but we now we're going to look at the, you know, it's not all over the map. So it's maybe more of the question is, John, is it just something in you that you know I've got to do some things? It's like you're like you hear the voice and you got to go. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. Absolutely. And I have, again, my goal is never to disparage anybody, right? I think everybody has their own journeys and they have all the things that are contributing factors to the way that they reflect the world that we all live in and all of that. But one of the most like jarring and unrelatable statements to me is, I'm bored. Right? Like I have folks that I knew and grew up with and that I care very deeply for, and they'll say, I'm bored. And I'm like, how are you bored? There are so many things I want to do. There are so many things I want to explore and learn and do, and I couldn't do them in 10 lifetimes, and I have to constantly like regulate myself and be like, no, it's not time to go learn how to surf, right? Like you're 350 miles away from the closest ocean. Relax. Like, and I love that. I love new skill acquisition. I love learning things. I love pursuing perfection while just face planting and like, you know, waking up with my face covered in sand and snot coming out of my nose. I'm like, oh my God, I'm terrible at this. How awesome is that? I love, you know, getting a little bit better. I'm like, you know, in jiu-jitsu, I'm getting my ass kicked every single day. Like I've been doing this for 11 and a half years. I train more than most people, and every single day there is somebody sitting on my head, cranking my arm while I'm yelling tap. Like there is no mastery of that. The levels of that run so deep that I could dedicate 10 lifetimes and I'll just never be the best in the world. So I love the pursuit of that. But like those micro victories and those mini like, oh my God, I lasted for 5 minutes with him without getting tapped instead of 2 minutes. Like that feels like I won. Like I'm rolling around the gym, like ripping my shirt off, yelling. I didn't see he beat me, but it took him 5 minutes this time. Like that's such a bizarre thing for most people, you know, to get behind. But I've got the moment my eyes open, I'm just like excited about the potential for the day. Yeah. And what can I do today that's, you know, everybody has off days or whatever, but like, there's so many things I want to do, and there's so many ways that I want to like help people, and there's so many ways that I want to make Nora's life better, or Ashley's life better, or my folks, or like people around me that like that I care about. Like, there's just not enough time. So yeah, I for sure feel like, oh, I gotta go. And my big thing, and like the stuff that I talk to my therapist about, right, is like, all right, and not to be pandering, but the EQ analogy for like front of house is what I actually like use in my, like, I have all these things on a soundboard, and you know, as you push on a soundboard one level up, right, main vocals, lead vocals up, the others come down. And that to me is what life is. Like, okay, if I know I have a fight coming up, I need to put more time into jiu-jitsu, which means that I know that I'm giving up spending time with my daughter. I know that I'm giving up spending date night with Ashley. I know that I'm like retro real estate, that more of my more of my stuff is going to fall on my buyer's agents or my partner Rochelle, or like, I know that to pursue something else means giving something else up, and trying to regulate with that is like, and be realistic with that is, okay, do I want to learn how to surf? Like, no, I'm not willing to do what it takes to learn how to surf, because that means giving up a lot of other important things.
Wow.
So that is how I've learned to regulate, and that's like a big decision of why I sold my shares to my partners at the tattoo shop. It's like, I'm not as passionate about it as they are, and that project deserves people who are all in. And I'm all in on retro real estate. I love that stuff. I can't wait to like get those things going. And I did what I wanted to at Golden Rule, and I owe it to the other things in my life, that the other obligations, and obligations has a pejorative context, but I don't view it like that. Like, I'm so lucky to be counted on. And so I think like I serve those obligations, and I owe those obligations, and it's like at my pleasure, like, to do those things. So
that's great.
It's a game of just playing with that EQ board to make sure that I'm not letting anything go all the way down.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
One of the things that you said was that struck me is you want to make things better for other people. With your retro real estate, that's the name of the company. How do you see that making things better for people?
Oh, I've got a lot of things to say on that. I'll try to keep it succinct, but pack a lunch for a moment, boys. So, and these are things I'm happy to provide links for, or most of this stuff is data driven, based off like peer research polls and things like that. But as a whole, in America, the most consistent way to financial stability, for folks to not be worried about where their next meal is coming from, not to be worried about paying rent, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not talking about like mass affluence, but just where you're feeling comfortable, is not the level of education. It's not how much you make from your job. It's whether your family, and you particularly, are a homeowner. So the majority, 96 or 97% of Americans' largest asset is the equity in their home. We look at the statistics between the wealth disparity among minoritized folks, black folks, brown folks, and white folks. The average white family right now has 10 to 12 times the amount of wealth as the average black family. And that is 100% of the time. We're not talking about massive inheritance, like past millions of dollars, is due and can be drawn statistically, like drawn directly to intergenerational wealth through private home ownership, like land ownership. And so there's a lot of atonement that we as an industry, National Association of Realtors, has to do, because we have, I mean, there's a lot of factors at play. But as a member of the National Association of Realtors and as a designated broker of a real estate company, I'm going to focus on what I can reach out and touch and change. We used to advertise white-only neighborhoods. That was like part of the package. Oh, it's got big, floor-to-ceiling windows. It's got new insulation. We'll only sell to white people. And so minoritized folks in this country for a very long time were unable to have access to the same opportunities. And, you can, wherever you're at in the political spectrum, we can recognize and understand that inequity and opportunity is a problem.
And John, I'm going to interrupt you because some of our audience, just so everybody knows, John wasn't saying that his real estate firm would only sell to whites. It was just him giving an example of the historic nature of this problem. So I just had to get that in there.
Thank you. Yes, all of that changed legally with the passage of the Fair Housing Act. But yes, so these are, when I say us, I'm talking about National Association of Realtors and the history of our trade organization, not us as Retro Real Estate. Thank you for
no worries, man. No worries.
But what we need, I think one of the largest things that would be effective is making homeownership, the opportunity for homeownership, more accessible across the board, because that is, again, I think and this is a data-driven decision. This isn't me doing any sort of like performative virtue signaling, right? I don't care. I'm looking at the data and going, okay, this is what the data is telling me. We need to undo and atone for some of those things where we were directly responsible. We, historically speaking, being the National Association of Realtors. So what we're doing at Retro Real Estate now, basically from 2019 on, is we do a lot of stuff about historic neighborhoods, and we do, but what we don't do is whitewash the history of them. So there are historic neighborhoods downtown here in Phoenix that in the covenants, codes, and restrictions in the deed, it still says that no one other than a member of the white race shall be able to be deeded into this neighborhood. Now, that's illegal, right? It's unenforceable, but that's still there. And so when we give a history of a particular neighborhood, we don't just give the great stuff. We talk about the bad stuff, too. We talk about what it was like back then, and we champion towards NAR, National Association of Realtors, things that will increase homeownership in minoritized groups. I'm working on a module for a nonprofit called Persevere Now. And what they do is they take folks that are incarcerated and they teach them how to code, as in like back-end computer stuff. And those folks come out of incarceration that have successfully graduated that program with I think almost 100% non-recidivism rates. They come out with like a 70, 80K a year job. They come out with a skill set, and they've had a lot of training. And so working on a pathway to citizenship, pathway to homeownership course with them to talk about, that I'll be teaching inside the prisons, to talk about the importance of homeownership and what that means for the future. Because the best time to plant a tree was 50 years ago, right? The best time for your family to buy a house was 100 years ago. But the second best time is today.
John,
go ahead.
What you're talking about is very near and dear to my heart. I've spent the last 30 years involved in prison ministry.
Wow.
And actually, that's the place I play the bass the most, doing that. But what you're talking about with the recidivism, the program that I work with gives people a spiritual background for when they get out.
That's awesome.
What you're describing is the other half of the equation. Is, let me put it this way: people can't get around the fact that most people are not going to die in prison. They're going to get out. And what kind of a neighbor do you want?
Yeah.
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 Well,
and I mean,
go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
No, please.
I just was
going
going. I was just going to say, as I've looked at, and I have a brother who has been in and out of prisons for majority of his adult life. Most of that through his own decision making that kind of led to it as far as substance. But one of the things that I can tell you just from my experience, and America has done a lousy job. It's almost like the equation of if John, you, Jeff, and I are going to a car dealership, and you guys are coming with me because I'm going to buy a new car, and you guys are excited for me because I've been wanting this car, and you hear me say to the dealership, you know what, you can get rid of those 2 back tires. I only need 2. You guys would say to me, Eric, you can't drive a car with 2 wheels. If you want something like that, you got to get a motorcycle. But no, John, Jeff, I'm fine here, man. I only need 2 wheels. I mean, because what we've done is that we've said, oh, your mental health? No, I don't need my mental health. Your physical health? Yeah, that's important, I think. My doctor has given me pills to take care of. Your emotional health? Emotions. That's not for me, man. That may be your thing, but not mine.
No thanks.
No thanks. And your spiritual? Hey, don't push your religion on me, right? But all of those 4 things are with us, whether we want to realize it, accept it, whatever, right? And I think so many times we send people out after they've made a mistake into a world ill-equipped to be able to get back on a road that's paved, that it has guardrails. It's like, again, man, and maybe that's in some ways that's the one big lesson that I know for us at Spirit of EQ, what we're trying to do is to, especially on the emotion side, is that idea that no, your emotions are there, they're your ally, and the better you get at managing them, the better your life will get, because you're going to be a better decision maker. So that was kind of what you kind of prompted that a little bit there. All right.
I love that so much. Like so much of my own personal work has been to not make emotional decisions, to recognize that, like, okay, it's a big flood of emotions, and those need to be seen and validated and listened to, and accepted that they're real. But my emotional position is not my intellectual position. And I can't get to my intellectual position until I have, ridden the wave of that emotional position, felt all the feelings about that, seen and recognized, heard them, told them, thank you for being here. I know you're here to protect me and to help me, but I'm going to wait a minute until I can feel a little more clear-headed.
I want to let you know, John, that this podcast is being recorded, and we could just use what you just described as a commercial for what we try to tell the world. That's awesome. That was an awesome description.
Since there's 3 bass players on this, I was just thinking, you don't walk into the music store with $1,000 cash in your hand. Because you'll probably...
$1,000. You'll spend $1,000.
Yeah, whether you need it or not.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, John, the conflicts of time have come upon us, so I have a sense that we need a part 2, and we've done that before. So if you're open to coming back to our wonderful laboratory, this has been awesome.
Yes,
You've been awesome, and we've just enjoyed it immensely.
It would be an honor to
Okay,
do that.
cool.
I appreciate you all
I love
so
it.
much.
We've yet to have anyone say, no, I don't think I want to come back. So we got a good streak going, and we definitely want to. So we'll talk about that more. We'll get and if you want to send over to us some links that you think people might value, and we'll get that into the show notes as well. And I can't thank you enough, John, and I know Jeff enjoyed it as well.
Yes.
So with that, ladies and gentlemen, those of you out there in the land, we really appreciate you being with us today, and we look forward to our next time together. Take care. Hi, everyone. This is Eric Pennington with The Spirit of EQ. I'm not introducing a new episode today. I'm here to tell you some things that might help you. Jeff, you're with me as always. So
Yes.
How do people get in touch with us?
Well, the best way is just send us an email at info@spiritofeq.com.
That's awesome. Jeff, I was also thinking about reviews, and I'm notoriously bad at asking for them, so reviews on all of the platforms wherever you get your podcasts.
Yes.
You think that'd be good?
I think that would be great because, one, that will help us learn how to make better ones. And it's always good for us
So
to hear.
we're not the perfect podcast host?
We're close.
Okay, all right, but
not,
still,
not totally
we want
perfect.
your feedback. We want your feedback.
But it also might let us know a new subject. Hey, we need to dig deeper into that.
Yeah.
So let us know what you think.
Cool. We really appreciate that. As always, too, there is social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, and we also have a YouTube channel. Those also have mechanisms or options for you to be able to leave a comment, a like, or those kind of things. Just want to make sure that you know how to get in touch with us. Right, Jeff?
Right. We appreciate you all.
Thank you.